Hello. I'd like to share with you a statistic. 50%. 50% of paid work hours from April to December 2020 were done remotely, as stated from an article from the United States Department of Labor. Now, I know many of you in the audience have contributed to these hours. Although I haven't personally contributed directly to these, I've seen many of the adults in my life have been impacted by remote work technologies, and I've seen the impact of their history and evolution. So today I'd like to talk about the evolution of remote work technologies from before the pandemic to during the pandemic and to now after the pandemic. According to an article in the International Journal of Management and Commerce Innovations, remote work has its origins in the 1970s, where it was called telecommuting or telework. It was basically just that, work via telephone. It was very limited, and it's changed a lot since then for sure. So I'd like to touch more on its early days now. Today, many people take personal computers for granted in their homes and office spaces. But in the 80s, when they were invented, they were a luxury item. And it definitely helped remote work back then because it allowed for digital materials instead of having to use solely paper and physical items. Now, in the 90s, the internet was invented, and this was a massive improvement for remote work technology because you could connect devices, say your home device and your work device, and share files between them and such. And then overall communication was a lot faster because of the internet. In the 2000s and 2010s, companies saw this and began to become early adopters for the technology, with the IJMCI stating in an article, IBM, Sun Microsystems, and Cisco were leaders in the charge for this trend. Now I'd like to touch on innovation in remote work that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was a very unique time for remote work technologies. First of all, rise there was a rise in video conferencing services like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Skype because they were simple in their functionality. They were easy to use and they were usually low costs, such as Zoom being free for schools during the pandemic. The McKinsey Global Institute did a survey in 2020, and it stated that 29% of work in the United States could be done remotely with no productivity loss, and an additional 10% could be done remotely if needed. This goes with a United States Department of Labor report that stated that the increase in remote work substantially contributed to productivity growth during the pandemic. These showed companies that remote work wasn't just a drag on their productivity, and maybe they could use it to keep their productivity going remotely or even increase their productivity to help their company even more. Now I'd like to cover remote work tech in the times after the pandemic or today. Companies have started to implement virtual reality and augmented reality in their operations. Namely, Apple, Microsoft, Meta have started using virtual reality meetings where people from many places around the country or around the world can meet in a virtual space and they can talk while being completely separated from each other physically. It's really unique in their operations and it's helped them a lot. Another example is Hyundai has been experimenting with VR and AR in its automobile design because you can see models in front of you without them actually being there. And then video conferencing technologies like Microsoft Teams have remained since the pandemic. I know that in my school district, they've replaced the phones with devices that are connected to Microsoft Teams. So instead of normal phone calls, they're Microsoft Teams meetings that they use now. And then there's file sharing services like Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, and then the cybersecurity of all of these services have increased since the pandemic, with Zoom namely pledging to its customers that it would improve meeting safety. And then finally, remote companies have arose since the pandemic, like Airbnb and video game publisher Void Interactive, because they can have talent across time zones and countries. Now, in conclusion, remote work technologies have undergone many changes before, during, and after the COVID-19 pandemic, and has grown as enabling technologies have emerged. I'd like to say that lessons learned from the 50% of work done remotely during the pandemic will allow for 100% of the evolution and growth that remote work technology will have in the future. Thank you.